Marlon sat alone in his living room, watching the late-night news with trembling hands. On the screen, an 8-year-old boy was describing an experience that made Marlon's blood run cold. Not because it was horrifying, though it was, but because every single word the child spoke, Marlon had lived 10 years ago. I was floating with people who weren't human. The exact same words Marlon had used. The exact same terror in the voice. For a decade they called him crazy, a liar, an attention seeker who invented wild stories for sympathy or fame. But now this child, this innocent boy with no reason to lie, was describing the identical experience. And everyone who laughed at Marlon, they'd gone silent. Because if the child is telling the truth, then what really happened that summer night 10 years ago? It was late summer in rural New Mexico. The kind of night where the heat lingered even after sunset, and the air felt thick and alive with the sound of cicadas and distant coyotes howling somewhere in the darkness. Marlon was in his mid-20s then, working long days on a ranch just outside town. He'd come home exhausted, eaten a quick dinner, showered, and collapsed into bed in his small bedroom. The last thing he remembered before falling asleep was the rhythmic sound of cicadas outside his window. And then the light, not gradual, not a sunrise creeping through curtains. Sudden, blinding, flooding every corner of his room with an intensity that felt almost solid. Marlon tried to move, to shield his eyes, to sit up, to call out, but his body wouldn't respond. Complete paralysis. He couldn't move his arms, his legs, couldn't turn his head, couldn't even scream. The terror was suffocating. But worse than the light, worse than paralysis, was the silence. The cicada stopped. The wind died. Everything went completely, unnaturally still, like the world had been put on pause. Then came the sensation of weightlessness, floating, rising, his body lifting off the bed without any physical force he could identify. Fragment of memory followed, disjointed, dreamlike, but too vivid to be dreams. Smooth surfaces, cool air, and presences, beings, observing him. Then nothing. When Marlon opened his eyes again, the sky was turning pink with dawn. He was lying on his back at the edge of a cornfield, 3 miles from his house. His clothes were intact, but covered in dirt. His feet were bare. He had no shoes, no memory of walking, no idea how he got in there. Just terror, confusion, and a growing certainty that something impossible had happened to him. Before we go any further, have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain? Something that made people think you were losing your mind? Drop a comment, because what happened to Marlon next was almost worse than the experience itself. Marlon stumbled home as the sun rose, disoriented and desperate to tell someone what had happened. His mother was in the kitchen making coffee when he walked in, covered in dirt, barefoot, visibly shaken. Her face went from shock to concern. "Mijo, where have you been? What happened?" He tried to explain. The light, the paralysis, waking up in a field miles away. She listened, but he could see it in her eyes, the doubt, the worry. When he finished, she put a hand on his shoulder. "You were sleepwalking, Mijo. You had a nightmare. A very bad one." His father was harsher. "Don't you dare spread this nonsense around town. People will think you're crazy." But Marlon couldn't stay quiet. The experience felt too real, too vivid, too physical to be just a dream. He told his closest friends. They laughed nervously, then changed the subject. He told co-workers at the ranch. By lunch the next day, they were avoiding him. Word spread fast in the small town. Within days, everyone knew. Local reporters caught wind of the story and showed up at his house, asking questions, recording everything. The articles came out a week later. Sensational headlines designed for clicks and mockery. Local man claims alien abduction. New Mexico resident says he was taken by UFO. The comment sections were brutal. Attention seeker. Mentally unstable. Drunk or high, probably both. The town turned hostile. Whispers followed him into stores. Job opportunities dried up. His reputation was damaged. And in a small community, reputation was everything. Even people who were polite to his face pitted him behind his back. He could feel it. The worst part wasn't the mockery from strangers. It was the doubt that started creeping into his own mind. Maybe they're right. Maybe I imagined the whole thing. Maybe it was just stress or a sleep disorder or some kind of psychological break. But the gaps in his memory, the physical sensation of floating, the unexplainable distance between his bed and that cornfield, it all felt undeniably real. Yet without proof, without witnesses, without anything tangible to point to, he was alone. Over the months that followed, then the years, Marlon learned to stop talking about it. He locked the story away in a place deep inside himself where it couldn't hurt him anymore. He moved on with his life as best he could, but the memory never left. It was always there, lurking in the back of his mind, always questioning, always wondering. Nearly a decade passed. Marlon rebuilt a quiet life for himself. He found steady work doing maintenance for the county, kept to himself mostly, stayed out of town gossip. He didn't date much. The few times he tried, he found himself unable to share his past. How do you tell someone about the thing that defined you when it sounds impossible? He avoided conversations about UFOs, the unexplained, anything that might trigger the memories. But he watched the news obsessively whenever similar stories appeared, always searching for something, validation, explanation, proof that he wasn't alone. He'd see other people online sharing alien encounter stories. Anonymous forums where people posted their experiences without judgment. But he couldn't bring himself to do it. The ridicule had scarred him too deeply. Some nights, lying in bed in the darkness, he'd still feel it. The paralysis creeping over his body, the sensation of weightlessness, the blinding light. He'd wake up in cold sweats, heart racing, the phantom sensation so vivid he'd check his windows to make sure they were closed. But he never talked about it anymore. His family thought he'd moved on. The town thought he'd finally gotten over his delusion. But Marlon hadn't moved on. He'd just learned to suffer silently, carrying the burden alone, wondering if he'd die without anyone ever believing him, wondering if maybe, just maybe, they were all right and he'd been wrong all along. Then came the autumn night that changed everything. Trevor was 8 years old, bright kid with a gap-toothed smile, loved dinosaurs and baseball. Everyone in town knew him. He lived with his grandmother while his mother worked night shifts at the hospital 2 towns over. Good kid, never got in trouble. One autumn evening, cool and clear, his grandmother put him to bed around 8 o'clock, read him a story, kissed his forehead, left the door cracked open with the hallway light on, just how he liked it. She settled in the living room to watch her evening shows. At 9:30, she checked on him. Sound asleep, breathing softly. At 11, she checked again before heading to bed herself. The room was empty. Ed to reach out, to connect, to find others who understood. The bed was made, or at least not disturbed beyond the initial impression, where Trevor had been lying. The window was closed and locked from the inside. The bedroom door was still cracked open exactly as she left it. But Trevor was gone. Panic set in immediately. She searched the house, calling his name, checked closets, under beds, the backyard. Nothing. She called 911, then called Trevor's mother, who left work immediately. Within an hour, half the town was mobilized, flashlights cutting through the darkness, search dogs trying to pick up a scent, volunteers combing through nearby woods and fields. Police set up roadblocks. An Amber Alert was issued across the state. Everyone feared the worst: kidnapping, trafficking, the kind of nightmares that happen to other people's children, but never your own. This was a small town where nothing ever happens. Until it does. Hours passed. Midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., no sign of Trevor. No clues. No witnesses. Marlon heard about it on his police scanner. He volunteered occasionally with search and rescue. He joined the effort immediately, driving toward the search perimeter. But something about the details nagged at him. A child vanishing from a locked room. No signs of struggle. No forced entry. Just gone. He tried to push the thought away, but it grew louder in his mind with each passing hour. At 3:47 a.m., a truck driver heading home on County Road 12 spotted something in his headlights. A small figure, stumbling along the dirt road in the darkness. Barefoot. It was Trevor, 3 miles from his home. Police and paramedics rushed to the scene within minutes. Trevor was physically unharmed. No injuries, no signs of assault or trauma. But he was trembling violently, incoherent, his eyes wide and glassy with terror. They wrapped him in blankets, tried to calm him down, asked gentle questions. His grandmother arrived moments later, sobbing, pulling him into her arms. "Trevor, baby, what happened? Who took you? Where did you go?" The boy was shaking too hard to speak at first. The crowd of searchers, police, and family members gathered around, waiting, and then Trevor spoke. What he said next made everyone there go completely silent. Hit that like button right now, because what Trevor described sent chills through everyone listening. And for Marlon, standing at the edge of that crowd, it was about to change everything. Trevor's voice came out small and shaking, but every word was clear. The light came through my window. One of the officers knelt down to his level, speaking gently. "What light, buddy?" "Like a flashlight." Trevor shook his head. "No, it was so bright. It hurt my eyes. I couldn't see anything else." "Okay, then what happened?" "I tried to call for Grandma." His voice cracked, but I couldn't talk. My mouth wouldn't work, and I couldn't move. Everyone listening went quiet. His grandmother held him tighter. I couldn't move my arms or my legs. My whole body felt frozen. And then, the officer prompted gently. My body felt weird, like I was floating, like I was in the air, but nothing was holding me. His grandmother's voice was shaky. "Floating? Baby, like in a dream?" Trevor turned to her, tears streaming down his face, and shook his head violently. "Not a dream. It was real. It happened." The officer exchanged a glance with the paramedic. "Okay, Trevor, we believe you. What else do you remember?" The boy took a shuddering breath. There were people, but they weren't people. Silence. Someone in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. "What do you mean, son?" Their eyes were too big, and their skin was wrong. They didn't talk with their mouths, but I heard them, in my head. More uncomfortable glances among the adults. They looked at me. They touched my arms and my legs. I was so scared. I kept crying for my mom. He was sobbing now, the words tumbling out between gasps. I don't remember everything. It's like pieces are missing. But then I was outside, on the road, and it was dark and I was alone and they were gone. The adults surrounding him didn't know what to say. His grandmother thought, trauma response, shock, his young mind trying to process something horrible. The police thought, possible abduction with repressed details, psychological dissociation. The paramedics thought, extreme stress, maybe a mental break triggered by fear. But one person standing at the edge of the crowd, half hidden in shadow, heard something entirely different. Marlon. Every word Trevor just spoke, Marlon had lived it. The blinding light that came through the window, the complete paralysis, unable to move or scream, the sensation of floating weightless, impossible, beings that weren't human with eyes too large in communication that happened without words, waking up miles away with no memory of the journey between. His hands started shaking, his chest tightened, his vision blurred. It wasn't just similar, it was identical, down to details Marlon had never shared publicly, details he thought he might have imagined or dreamed. But here was a child, innocent, terrified, with no reason to lie and no exposure to Marlon's story, describing the exact same experience, in the same town, a decade apart. The implications crashed over Marlon like a wave. Marlon stood frozen, an internal war raging inside him. Part of him wanted to run, to get in his truck and drive away, to protect himself from the ridicule and mockery that would inevitably come if he spoke up now. But Trevor's terrified face, his trembling voice, the way the adults were looking at him with pity and doubt. The boy was living Marlon's nightmare, not just the experience itself, but the aftermath, the disbelief, the isolation. If Marlon stayed silent now, Trevor would face exactly what he faced. Years of people thinking he was crazy. Years of carrying this burden alone. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. I need to tell you something. The crowd turned. Several people recognized him immediately. Some faces showed skepticism. They remembered his story from years ago. One of the officers held up a hand. Marlin, we're handling this. We don't need. I know what happened to him, Marlin said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. I know because it happened to me. 10 years ago. Almost the day. An uncomfortable silence settled over the group. Someone in the back muttered, "Oh, here we go again." But Marlin didn't stop. He couldn't stop now. The light, the paralysis, the floating. Waking up on a road miles from home with no memory of how I got there. Trevor's grandmother looked at him, then down at Trevor in her arms. The boy's eyes went wide. He nodded frantically. Yes, like that. Exactly like that. The child's validation hit, like an electric shock through the crowd. The officer turned to Marlin. You're saying you experienced the same thing this boy just described? I tried to tell people 10 years ago. No one believed me. An older officer, one who'd been on the force back then, spoke up. We thought you were. We didn't take it seriously. Marlin's voice cracked slightly. I know you didn't. But that boy just described things I never told anyone publicly. Details only someone who actually experienced it would know. The crowd was visibly divided. Some still skeptical, arms crossed, faces hard. Others unsettled, uncertain, glancing between Marlin and Trevor. A woman pushed through the crowd, a journalist who'd covered Marlin's story years ago. She pulled out her phone and started recording. Marlin, would you be willing to go on record again? Tell your story. He looked at Trevor, still wrapped in blankets, still shaking. Looked at the boy's grandmother, fear and confusion written across her face. Then back at the journalist. Yes, he said quietly. Because if we don't talk about this, if we let people dismiss it as imagination or lies, that boy will spend the next 10 years the way I did. Alone, doubting himself, wondering if he's crazy. His voice grew stronger, and he doesn't deserve that. No one does. The news spread like wildfire. By sunrise, local stations were running the story. By afternoon, it had gone regional. By evening, national outlets picked it up. Child's disappearance matches decade-old UFO claim. 2 witnesses, 10 years apart, describe identical abduction experience. Suddenly, Marlin's old testimony was being pulled from archives. Reporters dug through newspaper records, compared the accounts side by side. The parallels were undeniable and disturbingly specific. Both described an identical type of light, blinding, white, all-encompassing. Both experienced complete bodily paralysis. Both reported a sensation of floating or weightlessness. Both woke up exactly 3.2 miles from their homes, on dirt roads, barefoot. Both had memory gaps lasting approximately 4 hours. Both described beings that were humanoid but not human, with oversized eyes and telepathic communication. Neither showed signs of physical injury, but both exhibited profound psychological trauma. UFO researchers and paranormal investigators descended on the town within days, some genuinely seeking truth, others chasing publicity and book deals. Skeptics argued loudly, shared delusion, copycat story influenced by media coverage, sleep paralysis coincidence. Believers argue back, corroborating evidence from independent witnesses. Too many specific details to be fabricated, pattern recognition suggesting ongoing phenomenon. The town itself fractured down the middle. Some residents quietly approached Marlin to apologize. I'm sorry we didn't believe you. I'm sorry for what we said. Others doubled down. There's a rational explanation for this. There has to be. Trevor underwent extensive psychological evaluation by child trauma specialists. The consensus, no signs of lying or fabrication. His fear was genuine. His memories, however impossible they seemed, were sincerely held. Marlin and Trevor eventually met in a supervised therapeutic setting. The connection between them was immediate and profound. 2 people, separated by age, by a decade of time, who'd lived through the same inexplicable experience. Trevor looked up at Marlin with wide eyes. Did they hurt you? Marlin knelt down to his level. No, buddy, they didn't hurt me, but they scared me, just like they scared you. Does it get better? Trevor's voice was small. The dreams. Marlin hesitated, choosing honesty. Sometimes. But Trevor, you're not alone anymore. I'm here, and I understand. No definitive answers emerged from the investigation. No spacecraft was recovered. No physical evidence was found. No government conspiracy uncovered. Just two testimonies, eerily identical, separated by a decade, from two people who had no reason to lie and nothing to gain, and a town forced to confront the deeply uncomfortable possibility that something beyond their understanding might be happening in their own backyard. Do you believe them? Or do you think there's another explanation? Drop a comment below. We genuinely want to hear what you think, because how this story ends is complicated. Months passed. The media attention faded, as it always does. Reporters moved on to the next story. Trevor returned to school. He saw a therapist twice a week. Some kids whispered behind his back, but his closest friends stood by him, fiercely protective. Marlin became an unexpected mentor. He checked in on Trevor regularly, taught him coping strategies for the nightmares and the anxiety. For Marlin, the experience was bittersweet. Finally being believed, finally having validation after a decade of ridicule, should have felt like pure relief. But it didn't, because a child had to suffer for that validation to come. A child had to go through the same trauma Marlin experienced for people to take it seriously. I wish it had been me again instead of him, he confessed his therapist one day. He's just a kid. He shouldn't have to carry this. His family reconciled with him. His mother cried and apologized for not believing him. His father, gruff and uncomfortable with emotion, simply put a hand on his shoulder and nodded. Some townspeople never apologized, but their silence felt different now. Less mocking, more uncomfortable uncertainty. Marlin still didn't have all the answers. He still didn't know what happened that night. Why him? Why Trevor? Why this town? But he wasn't alone with it anymore. And neither was Trevor. Together, they started a small support group for people who'd had unexplained experiences. No publicity. No media. Just quiet meetings in a church basement where people could share their stories without judgment. The experience fundamentally changed Marlin. He was more open now, less afraid of what people thought, less controlled by the fear of ridicule, because he'd learned something crucial. Validation from others is meaningful, but self-belief matters more. Trevor was young, resilient in the way children can be, but he carried a weight no child should have to carry. Marlin made a promise to himself and to Trevor's family. He'd help carry that weight. When you're ready to talk, I'll listen, he told Trevor. And when you can't talk about it, I understand that too. A bond forged in shared mystery, an unexplainable experience, in trauma and eventually in healing. So here's the truth. Some experiences defy explanation. We may never know with certainty what really happened to Marlin and Trevor on those two nights, a decade apart. Was it alien abduction? Sleep paralysis manifesting with unusual consistency? Some kind of shared psychological phenomenon? A government experiment no one will acknowledge? Something else entirely that we don't have the language or framework to understand. The truth remains Marlin suffered in silence for 10 years because no one believed him. The ridicule, the isolation, the self-doubt, it nearly destroyed him. Trevor's experience, as traumatic as it was, validated what Marlin had lived through. It gave both of them something they desperately needed. Someone who understood. Two lives forever altered by something that defies rational explanation. The lesson here isn't about aliens or UFOs, or whether any of it was real in the way we typically define reality. The lesson is about how we treat people when they share experiences that challenge our understanding of the world. When someone tells you something that sounds impossible, that defies logic, that makes you uncomfortable, listen anyway. You don't have to believe them. You don't have to agree with their interpretation. But you should respect that their experience, whatever it was, is real to them. And your dismissal, your mockery, your refusal to engage with compassion, that has consequences. Sometimes validation comes too late. And sometimes it comes through the most unexpected witnesses. If this story left you with more questions and answers, hit that like button. Share it with someone who's into unexplained mysteries, or anyone who's ever felt like nobody believed them. Drop a comment below. Do you believe in alien abductions? Do you think there's a rational explanation for what Marlon and Trevor experienced? We read every single comment, and we want to hear your perspective. Subscribe for more stories that challenge what we think we know about reality. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching. And remember, the universe is far stranger than most of us are willing to imagine. See you next time.